So they thought they were getting like 80,000 pay-per-view buys. The first show, they thought they did 80,000. They needed to do 50. That would have been a runaway success, making tons of money. Everything is fine. Like, but WWE were like leaking out to the world. It's like, there's not a hope they're getting 80,000. Like, not a solitary hope in hell that 80,000 people bought that show. Our sources are telling us it's closer to 18,000, which would have been dramatically below what they needed. And it turns out WWE were right. Because there was an employee for TNA named Jay Hassman, who was basically their pay-per-view relations and marketing guy. So he would talk to In Demand, he would talk to all the pay-per-view companies and ensure that, you know, everything's running smoothly. They'd get all the promotional material, that all the deals were made, that, you know, TNA aired on the right night with the right content. And it went like, all that went smoothly. That was his job. Turns out he wasn't doing it.
Damn it, Hassman.
He was being paid six figures as well. This guy is being paid a six-figure salary, just like Vince Russo, and he utterly, calamitously did not do his job. It turned out all of his pay-per-view estimates were utterly made up. He would fraudulate? Fraudulate's not a word. Is fraudulate a word, Liam?
Fraudulent's a word. I don't know if fraudulate's a word.
But he would manufacture documents from In Demand. He would print stuff out on their letterhead, telling how many pay-per-view buys they got.
This seems super illegal.
It is. It's just full-on fraud. Because by all accounts, he was basically working for WWE as well at the time, so it was an utter conflict of interest.
How does this happen?
He was working for a marketing company that also worked for WWE. So there's people that believe that either A, it was like flat out sabotage on behalf of a guy who was also working for WWE, or like less maliciously, that it's a guy who just knew he had a marketing gig with WWE, so did not care enough about trying with TNA, even though they were paying him six figures.
Someone clearly didn't do their due diligence ahead of time.
But like, he was working for the company since February. Like, he was one of like the early employees. It was Team Sports, by the way, was the name of the company he was working for, that was also working with WWE. So he was that was a full-on conflict of interest. He was forging documents that suggested they were doing better pay-per-view numbers than they did. Because at one stage, one of the In Demand people showed up to one of their shows and it's like, oh, hey, you know, we got these numbers from Jay, they're saying we got 80,000. It's like, we haven't talked to Jay in months. Jay's disappeared. He doesn't interact with us. And then they were like, wow, what?
That is definitely a red flag.
Yeah, when the dude who's meant to be like your pay-per-view provider relations is not in fact talking to the pay-per-view providers, that's usually a thing that makes you think, oh geez.
Damn, Jay's at it again.
Yeah, Jay said there's like, oh, we're on Dish Network, we're on Cablevision, everything's fine. And it turns out they weren't. So they didn't have the pay-per-view clearance they thought they had. They had all these press kits that were meant to go out that weren't sent out because he didn't do it. Like, he didn't do anything he was being paid to do.
I hope they, like, sued this dude.
We'll talk about this more next month as well, because they file a lawsuit in August. So we'll talk about the lawsuit against Jay Hassman next month. But we were simply talking about the incompetence of Jay Hassman on this episode.
Jesus.
So from Jerry Jarrett's book, by Hassman's numbers, we thought we had about 175,000 buys for the first three shows. Instead, In Demand is projecting us at about 50,000 buys for the three shows combined. So basically, the company went broke. The company filed a lawsuit against Jay Hassman, which it's all fairly boilerplate. He committed fraud, blah, 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 blah. His partner, Len Sabal, released a statement to PW Torch where he's like, he kind of disputed everything that happened, that he was giving out about the amount that they owed the Health South. Based on Jerry's book, he tended to roll that back as the month went on. He was like calling TNA being like, oh no, I'm tying myself to the sinking ship of a fraud. No, oh no. Like, speaking of fraud, Richard Scrushy went to jail for fraud. So did Jay Hassman eventually. I don't believe related to the TNA fraud. I believe he committed another fraud that caused him to go to jail eventually.
This sure is a lot of alleged flawed. It is flawed fraud. Because if you don't get away with it, inherently it's flawed fraud. It's just so much fraud from the beginning.
A lot of fraud going on around TNA. We're not nowhere near the biggest fraud yet, Eric Bischoff. If you want to hear us talk about the biggest fraud, you will have to subscribe at patreon.com/kiddingme to listen to our Patreon series.
Feel free to dump all of your illegal money into Patreons on our Patreon.
If you are committing fraud, we will accept your fraud money.
If you're committing fraud, boy, do I have an offer for you. The $10 bit here on the Patreon, if you've got to be kidding me.
Jay Hassman released a statement during this period, which is one of the most, like, weird, deranged, off-kilter things I think I've ever seen in my life. You know, usually when, like, you're being sued by somebody, you get your lawyers to release a very boilerplate, like, this didn't happen, blah, 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 we will address these. That's not the statement he released. It's a bizarre, borderline gibberish nonsense statement that it's in the full thing is in the show notes if you want to read it in full on Patreon. We're not going to read it in full.
I feel like you should read it in full right now.
You want me to read it in full?
Yeah.
I will read it in full then. I will be a man who will do what the podcast needs.
Yeah, I think the podcast wants.
So Jay Hassman said, quote, "He said, she said, paranoia reigns. One impugns, another seconds. A rumor is suddenly verified as truth. All spirals outward. Everybody's living in fear. Disasters on the horizon. Anger. Hatred is incited from within. As with venomous leak scoops, with 5 minutes later OneWrestling.com exclusive and extensive interviews. Read, in actuality, diatribes. Manipulative, scandalous follow-ups, mixed with rumor-mongering, and not only attempted character assassination, but also highlighted by threats of death by shooting. All this just because some people don't understand, won't listen, and regardless of how many times they're explained, just don't get it. Don't get it. Misinterpret, cycle bad info in-house, get confused, lose focus, strike out helter-skelter, and when all else seems incomprehensible through a blood-wrenching fog of self-deception, scream, get the lawyers! Bubba Ray Dudley saw with tables.
That's... He's going to say like Team 3D.
Yes. Time for a reality check, guys. Better yet, let's try for a couple of reality checks, all centered on the infamous complaint impetuously filed by JSE and destined to become laughable classic in the cable and pay-per-view business and its workings. So what's it about, Alfie? Try this for starters. Can I read all of this? It goes for like another 7 paragraphs.
That's it? I thought it ended at or just Elder JJ.
No, it goes all the way down to Jay Hassman.
Oh, Jesus. Well, there you go. You got the most salacious, fun, insane bits at the start. The first paragraph of which just sounds like a Hideo Kojima game description.
Yeah, it's like, this is Metal Gear dialogue. It's like, Snake, he sheds, she said, paranoia reigns.
Paranoia reigns. One imbues, another seconds. A room is suddenly verified as old truth.
It's bizarre. He's literally writing poetry. Basically what it comes down to is he claims that they had no money for marketing. That's like the crux of the thing, which is probably true, but also you fraudified. I can't come up with a word. It was fraudulated last week. Fraudified this week.
Committing fraud.
Forged, I think, is the word I'm looking for. Instead of fraudified
Forged.
and fraudulated and fraudology and all of the other imaginary words that I'm coming up with. Which, by the way, I hear Jay Hassman is teaching fraudology in Full Sail University.
Oh, allegedly.
But he basically claims that they had no marketing money. He did take the job with WWE, but they should have known that. And
they should have known that. I told them nothing, and they should have known.
He gives out that the marketing budget was only $72,000, which seems like a lot, honestly. But still. Yeah, he goes into all cap shouting. As I said, the whole thing's on the Patreon. It's one of the most bizarre things I've ever read in my life. And I can't imagine that if you would ever read something from a man like this, you'd be like, I'm going to hire that man. He seems competent.
P.S. No telephone calls, please. My lawyers say nothing but prepared statements in order to prevent any more downright consterning crisis creations. P.S. Email any questions to me, and I will only answer the ones that the council says I can.
I find that fascinating, because that suggests that his legal counsel read and approved this statement. Which...
shit. I like his other one. He sets it up like a promo. But that's a matter for the next statement. According to Jay, we'll call that one number 2, and it's coming your way soon. So stay tuned for more loony times.
This guy was an executive in WCW and working for WWE at the time, technically. And this is what he puts out there as his official statement about what happened here.
He's clearly been around wrestling too much because he's just cutting a promo as his official statement.
It's gone to his head. It's ruined him.
Allegedly.